All right, another common objection you'll hear about market defense, and again, this is similar to other status arguments, is that they'll concoct a hypothetical example where it's doubtful that defense, market defense would succeed. And it has to be conceded that, yeah, that it's very easy to hypothetically create a situation like that. But typically, those same hypothetical situations would equally apply to a state. So, for instance, I've heard someone say, well, what if you have a city and you have free market defense, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a vastly superior military force that you didn't anticipate, that you had no way of even comprehending their capabilities, suddenly materializes and surrounds your city, and they're completely implacable, and they completely are more powerful than you, and they want to attack your city. Uh, Even assuming I mean, yeah, if, in those situations, if that were to occur, it seems doubtful that a militia or private defense firms or civilian gun ownership would be super effective. However, it seems also the case that that would be true if the city had a governor and a police force and a military. Many it it's amazing to me how this double standard exists where if both the state and a market fail, that proves that the state is superior or should be advocated, and that just doesn't make any sense. If you have a situation where they both fail, then that circumstance doesn't speak to the efficacy of either. And so these hypothetical situations, I guess they're useful as thought experiments, but if no question of their likelihood is put in, then their relevance is pretty limited. And I would say that the market, like everything else, it responds to demands, supply and demand. And if you are in a situation where it seems probable that there'll be excessive violence. Say you live in a region that is adjacent to an area that has roving bands of bandits and warlords and all kinds of violence, then it is very likely that you will take more defensive measures and expend more of your income and productive effort towards defense than you would if you lived in a situation that was idyllic, where there was very little violence anywhere. And it's kind of silly to have a hypothetical situation where you have a situation that, for as far as anybody can tell, is peaceful and nonviolent and not likely to entail a great deal of risk, and then suddenly, without warning, thrust that situation into one of excessive violence and extreme militarism. Hypothetically, I guess that can happen, but it's very unusual. When huge assaulting armies, aggressive force usually develops over time. So for instance, the Nazis, it wasn't really a secret that they were militaristic. It wasn't, people maybe didn't know what day they would invade Poland, but it wasn't a surprise when it happened. And there were plenty of people who reacted accordingly. Now, in the case of Poland, the Polish government reacted extremely poorly to the possibility of a German invasion. A lot. We could probably argue that the population would have been better if they had, been left to their own devices rather than vest all their hopes in a centralized state, which, as I pointed out in another video, is more likely to act in its own interest rather than that of the people. But be that as it may, it's still the case that if we it's unreasonable to assume that a free market stateless society would have some set amount of defense, because what it's going to have is whatever the consumers in that society deem is necessary, and they're likely to have a fairly informed view of it. They're not going to be completely unaware if they're being menaced by some assailant, whether that be state or non-state. And if there's a situation where they aren't menaced, for instance, the region where I live in Michigan, there has never been a war, ever. I mean, you might go back and say, well, during the Stone Age, some of the Indians perhaps had violence between each other. One would debate whether that would even reach the standard of war in the Western sense. The communities, they don't have a history of the time when there was a battle, or the time that it was occupied by the military. That time has never existed. And you go all around here, you have to go a long way before you find any place that's ever had any kind of war. The closest you could do would be, well, there's some fighting with Indians, I guess, but a long time ago and extremely rare and low intensity by any standard. And so in this region, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money on defense. There aren't bands of Vikings or Somali pirates or Chinese warlords or Canadian special forces attacking all the time. And so people in that situation are likely not going to be buying tanks and aircraft carriers. They might not even put locks on their doors. However, if you lived on the Mexican border, you'd probably have more than just locks on your doors. And you'd probably have more than just a deer hunting rifle. So again, it's a similar fallacy to the one I discussed earlier, but people just seem to think that the market has to ape the state, and it doesn't have to. In fact, it shouldn't probably. It's a waste. The state has a one-size-fits-all solution for everybody, and even if there are certain situations where that solution actually makes sense, so I guess it's hypothetically possible that there would be situations where aircraft carriers make sense. I can't really think of any, but I guess it's possible. But it doesn't make sense if you live in Iowa. It doesn't. If you're in Iowa and if you feel the need to defend yourself, there are probably better, more efficient, more effective ways to spend your money than on an aircraft carrier. Now, I could be wrong. I mean, maybe there's a reason to do that. I can't categorically deny that it's possible, but if it didn't turn out that way, I wouldn't see that as a mark against the market. So if a situation were to occur where the consumers in this society had no idea that they were going to be attacked, that they completely underestimated the potential risk, it's very doubtful whether some state that ruled over them would be so wise as to have anticipated this risk so much better than they. But people have an interest in protecting their lives and their property, and they take whatever steps are necessary to ensure that. And the idea that they would just blissfully remain ignorant of potential threats is kind of silly. And yet that's the basis of a lot of critique, is that, oh well, they don't know how dangerous it is without the president telling them. So there's that. And then, well, I think in my next video I'll go a little bit over a few empirical examples. But all right, that's it for this one.